Hey everybody, Seahorse Tiger here. Captain of the Lonely, Troubadour of the Lost, Master of the Wiggle Machine. Oh my gosh. It's 4 in the morning. I have 2 sets of steel doors over the windows. And this is what's still coming through. We really messed up the ozone. And then we created that crazy thing. It was so weird. You guys remember when the polar ice caps flipped? No one saw that coming. They melted so much that they loosened, I guess, for lack of a better word, and everyone's like, oh, it's going to melt, and most of it did, so there's the flooding that we all know about. And then there was that crazy, when it started, I guess, at mid-June, went to early September, where these massive polar ice caps started picking up steam. They were creating some sort of, energy as they melted. Not only were they melting it, but it created a kind of propulsion within the current because of thermodynamics. Some things were the hot, the cold, I don't know. So these things started to shoot across the ocean, these massive, Montana-sized chunks of ice just flying faster and faster and faster and faster from pole to pole. Everything was flipping because we fucked it up so badly that even the magnetic lines were the magnetized aspect of the earth couldn't hold its shape, so the physical form started to drift faster. The tectonic plates started to move at up to a foot a year. It was so nuts. You guys remember that? It was crazy. We had to not take roadways because about every third day, a 10-foot buckle would ripple through the road for up to a mile. If you were on the highway, you'd just be pew, pew, yeah. It was insane. And it was a tragedy at first, and then a little wow, that's almost that is crazy to see. We've seen earthquakes, we've never seen these ripple whiplashes. But it's because the tectonic plates are now moving so fast that everything's amplified more. So we couldn't use the roadways, the airports went out. It was, a nightmare. And obviously, especially with the flooding. And of course, nobody anticipated. They anticipated, but you can say something like, there's going to be more storms. And so all right, you know what? I kind of like storms, man. Summer day, a nice storm comes in. I don't know. So what? We have some more storms. Yeah, well, we've never seen storms like that, remember? You guys remember, right? You guys remember the storm of 2050 that changed everything? The sea level had risen. I can't remember. What was it? 6 inches by then? I don't know. You can track it by when Venice went under, and when coastal Florida did, and then they built that crazy fucking wall in California. That was nuts along the Baja Peninsula to try to keep it at bay. And then, 2050, the storm. So that because the water had risen, it changed the amount of H2O in the atmosphere, and something, it wasn't the ozone, whatever, the smog layer started to reflect. Oh, that was it. The hole in the ozone, this is about 2048, the hole in the ozone, just by happenstance that no one was thinking of, as humans tend not to do when they have huge technological breakthroughs, this is amazing. And then there's a generation whoa, why did nobody think of that? Brakes on a car, you guys didn't put that in the first place? Well, no, we invented the car. We thought that was pretty great. So in 2048, the hole in the ozone, just by chance, lined up right over the plastic mass in the ocean, which had that weird bacteria that was a reflective bacteria that somehow allowed this new parasite bacteria to eat plastic, which was so great. We're let's spread it over all the plastic. They'll eat it. Not realizing that these iridescent green shells, these tiny things, they were part of how they used the plastic and created this massive reflector in the ocean. So it's that fucking... I think they said it was what was it? Was it it wasn't all of Europe? It was Spain, France, and Germany. They decided it was the size of frame. Spain, France, and Germany, and it was this plastic mass with all that iridescent bacteria eating it. And everyone's yay, we just solved this plastic problem. And then it started to become a reflector, and introduced that it's crazy. It was a 3-degree Fahrenheit jump, which nobody saw coming. They're it's a big deal. And remember the 2020s, if we go up 2 degrees, it's a huge deal. And then we did, and then we jumped 6, and it was a huge deal. And everything had to change because we couldn't all do the things. That mass was part of it because of the heat wave. And then in 2050 is when it lined up the ozone hole over that thing. And there was all that extra water, and those fucking storms came. They were a thing of beauty, no doubt about it. Maybe in part because when they come, you're well, I'm going to die. So, taking some last breaths, looking around, enjoying the scene, here comes basically the thing that's going to eat me. We were afraid of lions, and then we made something 10 times, 1,000 times worse than a lion. We made an apocalyptic storm rage machine. It was those ice storms that would get us. They'd be, I think, the one that came in 2050 was the one that eclipsed the atmosphere. It was a sheer wall. It was like a sandstorm, if you saw it, when you see video of it. It looks like a sandstorm coming in from the ocean. But it's these ice salt particles. It's just churning so fast that it's picking up ocean, freezing it, so I think the salt drops out, and so that was part of what was forming, and then somehow staying in the spin cycle, and the storm got so big, it transversed the atmosphere, which had never happened before, because a storm, this environment, we have this ecosystem. You get out there, it's in deep space. The storm actually was shooting off into deep space, and it was getting all this, and all the satellites came down. Remember that? God, it was such a crazy day. Because, I mean, nobody anticipated, right? The ozone over the plastic bacteria thing shoots the light up and creates this ice storm of salt as well that becomes like sand and would ball up. They'd be like, remember, like, sand balls this big but frozen solid, and then it got so tall that it reached outside the atmosphere into space. And when it hit space, those balls, which had stayed tight enough to penetrate the atmosphere, once they got in space, they dissipate, but with the rocket force they propelled out. So we were sending out trillions of these tiny, tiny ice sand particles into deep space at high speed, and they just obliterated all the satellites. Because that stuff was pluming out of the storm as the Earth rotates. So it's just doing this everywhere. It was like an AK. All the way around. The storm went for 36 hours. It did a complete loop. So anything in any orbit, nothing escaped. These tiny things would hit the satellites, and then there was enough of them. They just like turned them into Swiss cheese. It's like a cheese grater, Swiss cheese combo out there with these satellites. And they just... And so we lost the internet, we lost all our storage, all our data transfer, all communications went down, and we couldn't use the roadways because of the buckling, because the faster tectonic plates, which is the whole thing, right? So that I was talking about is the ice from the poles switched, and was also sometimes in mid-ocean they'd have these cruiser, the drone footage is amazing from back then. There was that one that was like, I think they said it was like if Uruguay and Paraguay met in the ocean. I think they're saying they're going 500 knots on these two ice particles as the poles flipped and smashed, and then those caused the tsunami of 53, right? I think it was 53. The one that wiped out Reno, that was 53, right? Yeah, that's right. Yeah, because that took out the whole. That's when the west coast of America got depopulated overnight. Was because of the tsunami that was crashing plates, and then the big pieces actually made it around. And somehow in that transfer, and we already knew that the magnetized ends of the Earth would sometimes flip in history, every so often they whoop. But they started to do it. Somehow the shifting ice and the magnetized poles just got a little off, and then they got into a dancey rhythm. So the Earth started to spin faster. Again, nobody had thought of that. It was like, whoa, we were worried about coastlines. Now we're talking about a faster spinning Earth. Oopsies. On top of which everything else, obviously, that happened by then. Storms flying into space, no more satellites, no more roads, what coasts wiped out, and then the poles flipping. So everything started to spin faster and faster. So we got, I think by the summer of 2062, they were saying that we were living 3 years in a year in terms of seasons. There's 12 seasons in what would have been a year. So the seasons are going faster and faster and faster and getting more extreme. You guys remember when LA got to negative 40? And it would do it for it was the worst, because it would do it for like I think the first was like a month, which it just not only never been that cold, but it was just that cold for a month. And then within 6 days, it got up to 110. And that went from, and that was the end of sewage. All the fucking pipes went everywhere that year when we started to get those swings. And then so that was the one-time occurrence in 63, right? And then, by the end of the 60s, it's doing that every few weeks, everywhere. So pipes weren't working, electricity wasn't working, everything was freezing, blowing up, freezing, burning, melting, wires, and we couldn't get parts to anywhere because there's no communication, there was no roadways. So it was truly a shit show, in all the ways. Remember, oh God, this is a grim memory, but do you remember the population tracker? It used to be like, say we were watching the population go up, hey, the stock market's going up. We started to watch it all go down. First like, wow, I can't believe we're down to 6 billion people, like 2 billion dead. This is insane. And then there was, we had a 1 billion party. When it was getting down to 1 billion people left, scattered through the world, just somehow through the gift of a few remaining drones, and how they'd used the drones to coordinate bird flights. So the bird populations boomed. It was one of the great things of the 2080s. And that was when the human population was get down to 1 billion. So I just remember we had a party, a bunch of us, of course, to celebrate being part of the last billion and to mourn everybody who was lost along the way. Those are obviously a grim few decades when everything went down. But yeah, those drones, God. So imagine, so it was those 2 decades, or 3 or 4 decades, whatever, when everything was lost, all the roadways, all the sewage, all the electricity, communication, travel, manufacturing, it all went, and there was those huge storms and massive seasonal swings and just people dying. So many people were dying. It was so grim. Just beyond anything we imagined. And it wasn't violent, really. In the beginning it was, but then it wasn't, because it was beyond that. There was no haves or haves not. Even, it wasn't like a zombie movie. It was literally just anybody who could get together and help each other was. There there was no such thing as having something that was an advantage. The only advantage was finding a group that could somehow be together and then hopefully coordinate with another group somewhere else. It was the sharing of resources was all there was. And taking just wasn't working. You needed to share. So these little pockets would come up that were born nothing more than good fortune. People that had been at the right place at the right time for the earthquake, the tsunami, the systems crashes, etc. And yeah, there was violence in the beginning, mayhem, but that died out within those first 10 years because the weather cycles were such that if you weren't part of a group, you died. There were no rogue groups. The only way to survive was through gathering together. So when by the time we're down to billion, we're in it together, all billion, even if we can't talk. And I think that was 85. That was the first time I saw the flock, as they called it. It'd been this sparrow that flew from, I think, Argentina to Newfoundland? Oh, no, it must have been west. I can't remember exactly where it was. Had done this annual pilgrimage. But now the seasons were speeding up and all these sparrows were dying because they were trying to do the journey all the time. And everything was changing on their flight path. And that's when that dude Trox, I can remember him, what a character. That's when he started to use drones to guide them. And he was able to use, because there was the old, there's that generator network that existed for a while there. Well, things were rebuilt. And he was using the generator to program these drones based on all the data we'd accumulated before the crash about the system and models. And he would use the drone to lead these sparrows to oases of food and shelter and formed a new flight pattern that they could manage in the system. So they would do it in jumps. They go forward two, back one, and it became this rhythm that the sparrows now were able to live year-round like before. And all from this one guy in his drone leading them. In this kind of crazy experiment. And then that flock created some sort of, they never really landed on a word, but because he was able to program the drone in kind of coordination with the saddles we knew from the theory of relativity, he was creating contours in what had become a chaotic magnetic biosphere. A magnetic biosphere Earth that was chaotic in its magnetizations and bioings. It was getting arrhythmic. He cut a channel through that, like a rhythm. And the sparrows were the first to fall into it, and then everything. It was that 85 was the first time I saw the flock. And by then it was, pelicans, eagles, monarch butterflies, the amazing... You remember the albino bats that came out of Ecuador? That they'd once we stopped harvesting the guano, it grew so fast on the Galapagos that there ended up being those bats that evolved white because all they ate was white guano. Beautiful bats with that crazy, we called them snorkeler bats because they had those they like a giant muskrat, but they were tubes because they would dive down. These bats that would dive into the ocean and use their sonar to get little minnows. And so they adapted the gills, but could still fly. And because there was so much more increased waterway, like the ocean grew so much, and not just went inland and up, but, again, that thing that we hadn't anticipated, was because of all the earthquake activity, the seismological activity, and then the storms and the erosion. All the places we built dams, contours, bridges, collapsed, caved, grew bigger, and then started to erode so fast because the season changed. So we ended up with those cavernous, deep trenches. Like, I think the one coming in from, there was the one that came up Baja that they said was deeper than the Mariana Trench. And it got all the way up to Denver. That huge trench, so like that, and the ocean, at that point, I think it got 111.8 miles wide, all the way up to Denver. So it's like a whole new ocean. There's so much more water. So those species were thriving, so the snorkeler bats were thriving. Because they had so much water, they could skip. Like they do that fly skip thing that was so crazy to watch. Because they do it in that weird formation. God, that was so crazy how they do that. So when it was over water, they would join the flock. And then, of course, in some ways, it was the turning point, right? Like, it was the howler monkeys. That cross between howler monkeys and flying squirrels came along. Those monkeys that were like pineapple size, a plump pineapple. And They could fly for 100 miles. It was so crazy. And they flourished. Obviously not over the water like the bats, but they were everywhere because they were able to adapt so easily to as the seasons fluctuated and the food sources started to spin so crazy. They were able to climb, fly, move so fast. They could go with these new changes. So they were everywhere. And like I said, I feel like that's when things changed because that's when they started to take care of people. Those flying howler monkey flying squirrels. They were so abundant. They were able to adapt so well to the new environment. They were everywhere. And I believe it was, oh gosh. She was from India. What was her name? I want to say but I can't remember exactly. Shoot, that's terrible. But it had like it was like Shelfio. She had a name like, but then she added the O. It was part of like Shelfio. Anyway, she was the one that went when they had the first pod of howler flying squirrel monkeys. She went and sat with them. Before they really had it down, she was like, I guess, kind of like the mother of because there was the cross generation as everything was just kind of going nuts. It's a wild time, and for howler monkeys and flying squirrels, that's for sure. But as their sizes changed, flying squirrels were adapted, getting bigger. Howler monkeys were changing, getting smaller. There's hey, nature finds a way. Nature likes to play, is what we found out there. And then that first litter wasn't able to survive because neither species would take it as its own. So like they kept having all these litters of howler flying squirrel monkeys that were dying. And I mean, we were gathered dying ourselves. Like our compassion was really high at that point because we were kind of like, man, we feel you, every other creature. Like it all felt equal. God, I remember you'd see a deer and you'd want to run and hug it. Just be like, oh my God, you made it. I haven't seen a deer in 15 years. Like they're all gone. How did you make it? Come in, please. What can I offer you? It was like everywhere was Noah's Ark. You wanted every living thing to survive so badly. So Shiplo, I wish I remembered her name. She was the one who took them in and sat with them. And she was so beautiful in how she was. Like, I mean, the truth is she was a beacon for a lot of us, if not all of us, I mean, there was a funny optimism. Not that we were going to make it, but just that in making it that far, there was a certain glee that came from just the gratitude and the understanding that everyone who died for you to live. There's no other way to say it. Survival was so lucky. And we were so aware of the masses that were unlucky that it started to feel rude to be down in their honor, In their honor, it felt like the only thing to do was be thankful so much for the day. We really didn't think we'd make it as a species or as any particular gathering. We gave up on the thought that we would perpetuate or survive anything. So we just lived for the day and tried to give as much life to every animal we encountered and human we encountered as we could. And somehow within that, Chaplu, she'd hate me for saying this though. My gosh, her and I had such an amazing friendship. Yeah, she was a true friend of mine. And, there are those friends that there is an infinite glint somehow in them that makes you love them so much. And Shiplo was one of those. The reason I don't know her name is she was always fucking with me. That's why I'm laughing. All the time that we were friends. And I mean, we were friends the whole time until she was no more. She would fuck with me on her name. I mispronounced it a little bit the first time. I was like, Shiplo? And she always twisted it 1 degree from then on. Whatever I'd say, she'd correct me in the wrong direction. She was so good at it. It was so funny. The very first time, I was like, oh, sorry. Nice to meet you, Shiplo. And she was like, oh, it's Shiplo. I was like, oh, nice to meet you, Shiplo. And the next time I'd see her, I'd be like, hey, Shiplo. And she'd be like, oh, it's Shiplo. I'm like, oh, sorry, what? She'd be like, oh, it's Shiplo. I'm like, oh, shit, my bad. Shiplo. And then the next time she'd be like, hey, Shiplo. And then she's like, oh, we don't stress the P as much. I'm like, I'm so sorry. And she's like, oh, God, don't worry. I mean, my own family doesn't even pronounce it the same, but yeah, it's Shiplo. I'm like, Shiplo it is. Mine's saying, like, hey, Shiplo. And she's like, it's Shiplo. I'm like, I'm sorry. What? She's like, oh, no, you totally have it. It's Shiplo. The S is a little more. It's Shiplo. I mean, you totally say it right. Honestly, I don't even say it. Sometimes I forget, but it's Shiplo. The lisp up front. Oh yeah, now I hear it. Oh my gosh. I'm sorry I'm not getting it right, but like, that's amazing. I love it. Hey, Shiplo. Oh, and she'd just go on and on and on. It was the most delightful game in the world. And of course, at some point I was in on it. Years later, she was really good. and making it so small. I really didn't catch on. And not that I was like worried about it. I just so enjoyed saying her name or anyone's name right, being attuned to anybody. Because the name, remember how that was the thing? Because that was the thing with the O. The reason she added the O's is names changed. Remember that? When we all got stripped down to little tiny tribes, and the name was a fluid thing. It just represented how you were in that moment, but then you just started, your true essence started to glow, so you just had a sound. So it was like your name, but as a sound that kind of only you could make. And it was so fun to meet anybody and just talk, just to feel their vibration, just to hear their sound, their name, their call. So we'd sit in those, configurations we had to use, because we had to have scouts for the weather, scouts for the hyenas, and then we'd create that little bowl of bodies that the sound would resonate to, and two different people would get in the bowl and do their call back and forth until they like fused, and then everyone would join in that call, and then would go foo, 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 off the bowl of bodies. It was so amazing. So amazing. Those were the best times. Yeah, so that's why we would change her name. So that's why she used to, whatever in the first place. She added that as part of her. So it's not like I wasn't in on it knowing it, but she still could always tweak me a little. And she gathered up the howler flying squirrel monkey litter that was abandoned. And, what can we say about Shiplo? I just know she's still laughing. I know she's still laughing. We're laughing with it forever. I can hear her voice whenever I do it, being like, oh, no. Oh, no. And then the little note. It's ongoing. That game, even though she's gone, we're still playing it. It's amazing. And she imbued through her what, her mother nature aspect, her God creator aspect. I don't know what to say. She couldn't instruct them. Their language skills were not what they are today, It's not like you have a conversation with them like now. It's very funny to listen to them talk. Kind of adorable. And especially when they're flying and they fly past. They go right by. What was that? We know now because we can speak it. So they couldn't communicate, and so she would just play these games with them the same way she fucked with me. She'd play these games with them that were so loving and kind and fun and generous in how they taught them and showed them the world, that's how they became as a species. This playful, generous, kind species. Granted, because they're kicking ass, so they're good on resources. But they're not trying to get more resources than they can have. They're trying to redistribute resources. The howler flying squirrel monkeys are thriving, not just because adapting to the new environment, adapting a new way of being, which is, things are all dying, but it's just because they can't share. Their waste becomes a resource to wear. All the little organisms, everything got out of balance. And it was the howler monkeys that became like the blood vessels, the arteries, that were moving little bits of everything everywhere, where they could tell it was needed. And they could tell it was needed because they'd commune in these huge hive flocks. And that's the one I saw in 85. That first flock. Because that was the first communication we'd gotten from all of each other was still alive. They were able to take in, when people would get together and do their body bowl, and howler monkeys would like imbibe that beat. And so just with it or whatever. I don't know. And then that flock would come, and so the first time you see the flock, the size of it, the scope, you just hadn't seen that much biomass in 4 decades. It felt like everything you knew and thought about and conceived of as life was dying. It was like desert and ice and storm, and yes, nature's bacteria were thriving, little things were thriving, but all the big things were dead, and it just seemed like hellfire. Oh my God. And we had just become so thankful to be alive at all. To be in our little tiny pockets in our caves. We were so thankful just to tell stories on the wall with what little fire we could generate. That was all that was left. That's all there would be. The light had gone out. And yet, out of gratitude for having gotten to be alive during the time of abundance at all, and gratitude for everybody who died before us, we chose not to go silently into that good night. We chose to keep the light going. That we'd gather in the caves and we would tell stories of wonder and of love, of hope and of promise, even though there was none. We knew no child would survive, no adult would survive. We were down to the last 5 or 10 years, based on where we were. No question. And we sang all the time. We'd do our body bowls and sing. It's all there was left to do. There's no place to go get resources. It was whatever we had stockpiled, whatever generators we have. And we made the choice never to compromise our rations in terms of hierarchy. All people, young, old, equal. No point, well, we gotta have the young survive. They're not. We're all gonna die at the same time. There's nothing to keep going. Everyone, we're just gonna celebrate life. We're not gonna draw straws. We're all in it together. We all get exactly what's enough to not only get by, but feel good. We're not gonna try to stretch it and suffer. We'll treat ourselves as kindly as we can, and each other with as much love as we can. That's who is left when there's 1 billion people. All the others are dead. They didn't have what it took. And it was over. And in 85, we saw that flock. I'll never forget that morning. Everyone would gather in silence at sunrise and sunset. Nobody talked about it. No one planned it. No one was like, you gotta be like, it was crazy how intuitive it became. Intuitive when there was no time left and no place to go and nothing to do but tell stories on the wall. It was everything our soul needed. We gather and watch the sunrise. Gather and watch the sunset. In silence. Together. It was so beautiful. And that morning, in that gray, crazy light with those streaks of... Remember how the arsenic got stuck in that one layer and would reflect light off the cadmium from all the mines that had ruptured? And you get that crazy maroon with the gold, and it would like ripple. It admittedly was so beautiful. It's like a curtain, a magic curtain, every morning. That lasted 10, 15 seconds. And you heard it, just the size of the flock coming, the howling monkey squirrels, and then there was so much life. Not just numbers of organisms, animals, creatures, but diversity in one place. Taking rides, hitching rides, like it was everything moving at once together in that channel that had been dug out by Trox. And when we think of him, the compassion with which he programmed that last program. Remember when it was like the last attempt to centralize the resource distribution through the generator grid? And we finally just put in, do it for everybody, make it equal. For everything. We're all in it together. And he's the one that wrote that code. And he's the one that programmed the drone, that created that funky pathway through the magnetic field that allowed, you had all those chaos storms everywhere and the seismic activity. And then we talked about like how the Red Sea parted. Like the storms parted in that crazy 7-mile gap that was like this. It's like a reverse tornado. Or I mean, it's like tornado, but the energy was going up. And it created a calm current that all the life could go through without harm. It's crazy. He created that. Out of the belief that the reintroduction of love and acceptance of all could actually reprogram the structure of the universe that we lived in. Once it had gotten crazy enough that all the old shit was out and it was just chaotic and anything could be inputted. If you knew how to demonstrate and put it into something, and he put it into the drone and created that, and then Shiplo put it into how to be. They were the two. And those howler monkey flying squirrels were the first to learn that. And they gathered up all the remaining creatures and started to teach it that corridor. So to hear it coming, to see it coming, there was no miracle ever equal. The joy, the tears, and then, you know how they brought all the food and water? The contraptions they had, they would use that, the way that the howling monkey flying squirrels had created a weave, a living weave. Remember they'd weave those vines that were, it was that cross we tried to do between hay and that creeper vine. Because the creeper vine, it would grow so fast in the new system. It's growing like 20 feet a day. So we thought we could make hay and eat it. Total disaster. Did not work. But grew like crazy, like cut us off even more, created those crazy fields. And how the monkey flying squirrels were able to figure out how to weave it while it lived. So they created those tunnels where all the plants would go up like that and they'd weave it. And then they could ship water. It was like that artery system of water everywhere. Then in that huge impenetrable wall that had choked us off of the crazy creeper vine hay hybrid weed. they cultivated it so it would like go through the arteries and hit the big hub, and then you could extract water. So everyone was in clean water. And of course, the plant loved it. The plant was thriving. It was taking the water and actually filtering it. Oh man, that program was amazing. And then they brought the food. And through that, right, and then they brought the stories. So they did that, and that was already, it was like they were gods, you know? They were gods. They conquered the unconquerable. They were immortal. Death had come to all of earth, and they had a new way, and they survived, and they brought us life. So we said, teach us your ways, like, we're in. What can we do to help? We love this team. So that was when things really started to take off, of course. And Shiplo was the one that had trained them in those ways and brought resources. Oh yeah, so they'd come, and that first time when they would do that, the whole crazy wiggle dance thing, and where all the animals would like do it syncopated and change the vibration of the air, and it would start to reverberate out into the chaos of the storms, because every animal was doing it down to a parasitic level, because communication had reached that point among the surviving species. It was intense. And so they taught us that, and we could hear in that the stories from the other human tribes that had survived in the caves. We heard their hellos and their stories, and so we began to communicate in that hyper hive mind dance thing. When the flock would come along, that was crazy, to say the least. Yeah, those are the turning points. Yeah, so that's all the stuff that happened. That's 2050 we talked about. I'm trying to remember what I was talking about. Was living, letting it go, letting it be. That might have been, I don't even know. Anyway, crazy time. I am Seahorse Tiger, Captain of the Lost, Troubadour of the Lonely, Master of the Wiggle Machine, as we all are. I think some people get confused when I say Master of the Wiggle Machine. You're like, oh, you're like the Master of the Wiggle Machine? I'm like, no, I'm like the Master of the Wiggle Machine. I'm down at the bottom. I'm a one. I am. I'm a Master of the Wiggle Machine. But the Wiggle Machine shapes like this. Being Master doesn't mean I'm on top, it means I'm on the bottom. I did enjoy it for a while there. People at parties, I hear you're the Master of the Wiggle Machine. Oh, yes, that's totally accurate. Why, what impression does that give you of me? Oh my God, you're a master. You must have devotees, disciples, do well, travel in amazing circles. Oh, yes, I do. What circles are you talking about? I'll travel in those. If you think I'm worthy because I'm a master. And then when everyone found out they were masters of the Wiggle Machine too, different story. So I'm Master of the Wiggle Machine. We bring it up, from down, out, into the what have you space. It does remind me of the, did you ever have the, remember when the howler squirrel monkey flyers, they did that thing where they built the, it was like, when was this? It was like 2010, I think, 2110? Yeah, the 2210, 2110, I forget. As an anniversary deal, they fused that new marijuana plant into the creeper vine hay tunnels, transferring the water, so there's that crazy THC here. Those creatures are crazy. They really get up to it. But no one knew at first. Everything was already pretty great. And that's when I guess that's when I would say we all learned how they spoke, That's when the started to resonate different, and we started to do it back. Remember, what was his name? I want to say Wolfgang. He was that German guy from Argentina, or like German Argentinian, who'd fallen into the salt crevasse before the it fell off into the ocean after the the Andes earthquake. He'd fallen into that salt mine, and then he was trying to get the salt for his tribe, and fallen way down there, and then the earthquake came and sent these, I think it was like a 5-6 earthquake, and it was shaped like this, these salt crystal cavern walls, and he was down at the bottom like, I'm a dead man. and Wolfgang Hemodor was down there, and I'm a dead man, and then the earthquake and started to go those crystal walls, and he came out a different man. Wolfgang Hemodor came out there on fire. He was such an amazing soul. Holy shit, you want to talk about a conductor. So Wolfgang Hemodor comes out of there, and he was the one that just started to speak that way, and coordinate our new language, Remember, he'd call it toe speak? God, he was so great. I loved his ability to adapt to a crowd, you know what I mean? I saw that guy, he did a senior citizen tour. Most people bet it was that weird time when everybody had died, and then after the Howler Squirrel Monkey Flyers started to get everything back online artery-wise, people had these extra long lives because we adapted to a tiny population, so our lifespans were doubling, and because we were so hooked in nutrient-wise that the system, the artery, the vascular system of the world, seeing us like a helpless little thing, was just like constant in its flow of what we needed. We were like back on the embryo kind of. So we were having these crazy long lives. And so he was a senior citizen, but it was so weird because we hadn't adjusted. So like that inner thing would have these weird roller coasters in your second 100 years because your body would be fine, but your soul like didn't know what to do. It wasn't bad, but it's just wonky. You need to go to the hot bits for a while and do some spa time, you know. So I saw him do a gig there. It was awesome. It was this one of those flying spas they put over. God, I think I got moved to one. Was it in Manitoba where they had the geyser? They got stuck in that cyclone. And carved out that crazy space in the rock that like water would spew up out of, become that crazy perfect temperature, and then that sluice, that like marble sluice, it was the oh my god, I loved it. It was the golden algae, oh man, those are the best years. Remember the smell of golden algae? I mean, it was heaven. It was like butter baked bread, you know, algae smell. And it would give you that incredible tickle, your whole system would relax, and that would grow on that carved rock that was like marble, and then the water would sluice you. I think that track was like a mile. And when you'd come out, your body would just be totally recalibrated. So that's where we'd go when we were senior citizens. It's not like dying, because it happened to everybody, and you get better and come out. So I saw him do a gig there, and because I'd gone to I needed a retreat, you know. And this was that kind of crowd. And it was awesome, because we were all in the big, huge water pool, you know. And he had those suckle creepers. I mean, those are the best. I love those. It was that snake. They called it the tether leather belly. They called it. It was that iridescent. It was like that bioluminescent snake. When you were in the pool, you know, there was always like it was about this deep, and those snakes would come along. It was so crazy because they're just teeming everywhere. You know, and they would do that thing where they'd like wrap around your head and then spin off. And that's because they were feeding on the parasites. Not parasites. Well, it's not rude to say something's a parasite, but they were small little insects. And it was that wonderful. It was just like, and they'd make that tiny little hiss rattle. No. So that was going on everywhere. It was bioluminescent. And the second moon came after the sandstorm over the Sahara. And that was 74. 74, they got caught in outer space and started to orbit around the moon, and then became its own gas moon around the moon. So the moon had an orbiting gas moon in sand. So we'd get that weird iridescent rust moon for 4 hours a day. 4 hours a night. So it's nighttime, but that moon's glowing. So it's crazy light. So you're in the pool with the tether belly snakes. They're doing that, and it'd be amazing. And then the honey creepers would come down, and whatever that, oh my god, what do we call it? Wallaby juice? Because the wallabies took off up there in the top of the canopy. Part of their excrement, the way the honey creeper would turn wallaby extract into that, what can we say, elixir? You know, the honey creepers would be hanging there, and snakes would be going, and you could just reach up and grab one, remember? And you just suckle on it, and remember that feeling that would come out of your fingers? It was like fire, electricity, feathers, you know, and you'd just be like, whoa! It was, better than any drug anyone had ever had, ever in the history of all drugs. It was that amazing. And your whole body would just glow. And because the honey creeper knew how much to give you, because it wanted to get you there, because it needed you in the pool to feed the snakes. Because the wombats were eating snakes. You know, so like, they had this whole thing going. And helping, you know, each with others survive and thrive. And so the wallaby excrement, really tether belly snake excrement through wallabies, through honey creeper vines, was like the elixir of life, you know. And so he was doing a show in there, Wolfgang Troubadour, and he was doing it all through his feet. He just was bouncing on the marble floor through the golden algae smell. Oh, that was amazing. And up through the water, you know. And so you just be like, you got the snakes going, you're on the honey vine creeper, and he's just, and he traveled a lot. I mean, he got around, man. Because everyone loved him. Howler monkey, flying squirrels, everybody loved him because he could bring a certain beat rhythm. And this is my whole point about him. I saw that show and he'd bring it for all the animals that was attuned to them. I mean, I saw him once just with a group of monarch butterflies, and he was like giving them something that like they flew away a little brighter and fully. That's who Wolfgang Hermidor was, badass. So he's in there. So yeah, he had this amazing ability to like find what you needed to hear. And because he traveled so much, you'd have all the stories from everywhere. All the people of the world, all the animals of the world, because he was so good. He could speak so good at that point. So well at that point. Yeah, I know. Yeah, so he was, if you know what I mean. He was great. At speaking to everything in the universal language that we used to communicate then. Since we were all in it together, there's a universal language. So he had stories from everything, because they told him the stories. So this traveling bard, mystic traveler, wonder guy, Wolfgang Hermidor, would bring stories and tell him. So I remember that night how attuned he was to like the story we needed to hear, where there's a story from Viking lore, or there was this algae bloom in the 1400s, that of course nobody knew about because it happened where there was no humans. There's this crazy thing on the precipice. Anyway, there's this amazing story. There's a wonderful lesson from that about how that group, because at one point the algae bloom attached to coral to survive this current and adapted. So it's all the story about that particular generation. It was honoring that algal bloom and the particular piece of algae that hung onto the coral, because really that was the hero, the renegade. Algal blooms were like, we're floaters. And then it was like, not me. And then that group was like, oh yeah. And that transformed a bunch. So I heard that, so whatever you needed to hear, he would, and I assume he's just doing it because how good a listener he was. And then he'd do his music and then tell stories through it. So I saw him there. I saw him at the geyser slide in the snake honeysuckle wallaby excrement pit lagoon. And that again, under the iridescent night moon. And then I saw him when I was with Troubadour. I got to do this amazing gig at a circumference conference, because it was sort of constantly had to be like, well, wait, how big should the circumference of our arteries be? Like, how are we in balance? And there was no fight. It wasn't a negotiation or compromise, because no one was there for a team. Everyone just get together, representative of a particular group, and be like, here's what's happening with us. Like, here's what it feels like. So therefore we might be lacking here. And over the course of the conference, everything would just rebalance. And then that rebalancing would go back into the program, which the howler monkey squirrel flyers would, intuit and speak through the universal language, and everything would just adjust. It was awesome. So I was at one of those circumference conferences to figure out the circumference of the Creeper Hay water tunnels. And so it was a crazy room, so everybody, so it has electricity to it, and that one was just like, he was sending these waves that, I kid you not, like, I saw that hippopotamus mastodon, we called it the hippopotamus mastodon, that huge one that developed out of the Congo. I saw it doing 20 feet in the air. No kidding, no shit, like, it was, of course there's the conference, and he was sending waves so big, and everything was in such harmony, including, all the material that made up the floor, that was bound enough to maintain the weight of all these animals, but fluid enough to take his wave. That's how big a wave he could do. Because he could talk to anything. He could communicate with atoms, regardless of how they were composed. He could hear them. He could hear a door. He could hear a rock. Wolfgang Hermidor was nuts. And he'd send those waves. So you'd see this hippopotamus mastodon go, and totally fine in the joints because the floor was doing it, and we were all doing it. And then within that, you'd have like your howler monkey flying squirrel, you'd have your snorkel bats, each swinging by, swinging, flying by. The swing side, what do we call it? The swing fly, no, the sing, swing, fling. That's what we call it. You got, and like we're doing the sing fling, the sing wing, what was it? The sing wing fling, yeah. We would do the sing wing fling, where we'd sing and everyone would take wing, and then you'd like fling what you were singing. I mean, it's so stupid, but so fun because you had those waves going. So like sing fling, like sing fling. You'd feel the wave, you'd sing it, you'd wing it, you just send it out. Sing wing, and then fling. Whatever you were singing, you just fling it into it all. But it was all going. Shoot, so you're doing your own thing, and the snorkeler bats are whoo, 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 whoo. And the howler monkey flying squirrel thing. And you've got the snakes like shooting up out of the water. And the golden algae, of course, would smell like butter baked bread. It would do that, amazing. Like underneath it all. God, that was amazing stuff. Sing, ding, 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 ding. The sing wing fling. Yes, Wolfgang Hermidor killed it at that. Using universal language. So that's, why were we talking about him? Did somebody bring up, I guess back to Cheplo. I mean, I guess, yeah, that's how we got, that's how we were getting by. Let me be, not be. Huh. Balance? I'm sure I was talking about balance at some point. But gosh dang. Can't remember what we're talking about. I do know that I am Seahorse Tiger. I am the captain of the lost. I am the troubadour of the lonely. I am the master of the wiggle machine. Sing it, wing it, fling it. Sing it, wing it, fling it.